So today we're going to be talking about the presidency and the role of the presidency in our political system. And the basic idea that I'm going to be trying to get across, one of the main ideas, is going to be the difference between what the framers had in mind when they created the presidency and the presidency as it exists today. And this doesn't refer specifically to President Obama, although I'll be referring to him. Had I recorded this lecture during the Bush administration or the Clinton administration or the Reagan administration, everything that I'm saying would be equally true right now, except when we get to the issue of presidential signing statements. So I want to start off talking about the constitutional requirements for being a president of the United States. In order to run for the office, there are certain requirements that need to be fulfilled. One is that you need to be a U.S.-born citizen. There was some debate over whether or not President Obama was actually a U.S.-born citizen. He is. I'm sorry, I try to avoid getting involved in political debates. This is not a debate. This is nonsense. This is somebody who was born in the United States. So I like to separate out what are actual debates, and there are many of them, and many important ones that we should be having. And then there are ones that are dumb, and that's a dumb one. Okay, so you need to be a U.S.-born citizen. You need to be 35 years old. Now, back in the day of the framers, 35 years old was essentially middle age, and it was actually beyond middle age because life expectancy was so low back then. And you also have to have lived in the United States for at least 14 years. So those are the main requirements. Now, originally, as the Constitution was written, a president could run and then get reelected as many times as he, or presumably she at some point, he or she wanted. But all presidents basically ran for 2 years up until Roosevelt. There are some minor exceptions, but for the most part, everybody just ran for 2 terms, not 2 years, 2 terms. And it's interesting to consider why that is the case. If there was nothing in the Constitution that limited the president from running for running more than 2 years, why would they? And the answer is this, and maybe you know it. The answer is this: because George Washington ran for 2 years, and because George Washington ran for 2 years, every other president that followed him basically followed his example. So that's the first thing. Also, there's something really interesting about the presidency that's not widely known or understood. And the best way that I can go ahead and explain this is by going ahead and showing you the oath, or reading to you the oath that the president takes when the president takes office. So when a president is sworn into office by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the president says the following words: "I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States." Now, in the lecture notes, I have the sort of what's going to seem like an obvious question. Does the president swear to preserve and protect and defend the nation? Well, actually, no. If you think about it, and if you look at the quote, if you're looking at the actual lecture notes, the president says that the president will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, because basically that was the idea that the framers had in mind for what a president was supposed to do. The job of the president was to protect the Constitution. Now, certainly in doing that, you protect the nation, but that was his job. In many ways, and you'll see this when we talk about the president's veto power, the president's ability to go ahead and say to Congress, if Congress passes a bill, to say, I don't like it, and veto it and send it back to Congress, that the veto power given to the president of the United States was in large part for that reason: to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. In many ways, what the framers wanted the president to do is what our Supreme Court does, and that is defend the Constitution. So let's start off with that in mind. We'll come back to this topic. From the framers' perspective, and when I say the framers' perspective, I'm talking about what the founders of the Constitution, the people who wrote it, thought. The president was very much supposed to take a back seat to Congress. By the way, just 1 second. That is a mirror in the background, so that is me recording right there. That's me. And then that's the laptop that I'm recording on. Do you care? Here, let me wave to you. I'm waving to you from, there we go. Okay, anyways, let's continue. Okay, the role of the president. The president was supposed to take a backseat to Congress. Very much so. Again, it's important to think about what the president does as the chief executive. What do we mean by the chief executive? The president's job is to, and this is what the Constitution says, to make sure that the laws are faithfully executed. Now, when you say faithfully executed, I don't mean executed like kill the law, carry out the law. So the way it's supposed to work is Congress passes a law, and then they go ahead and give the law to the president, or technically Congress passes a bill, the president signs it, it becomes a law, but in any case, the president gets a law from Congress, and then the president's job is to carry it out. So we've been talking about Phil's corn law, right, throughout this whole thing. And so in Phil's corn law, if Congress were to pass a law, Phil's corn law, that has certain rules about the regulation of corn, when Congress passes it, then they go ahead and they give it to the president, and the president goes ahead and carries it out. If Congress passes a law that says we're going to lower the national speed limit, so Congress passes a law or bill, and the president signs it and says, okay, the national speed limit shall be changed from 65 to 55 or something like that, the signs don't automatically change on their own. It's not like you're sitting there and go, whoa, Congress must have changed the speed limit because look at that, it's dropping to something else. No, somebody has to actually go out and change the signs. That's the president's job. Not the president himself, like, hey, I'll be back, I got to go change some signs. Not like that, but the president's responsible for making sure those things get done. So it's important to keep in mind that from the framers' perspective, the president's job was to go ahead and execute the laws that Congress passed. Now, the next role of the president was the president had the authority to go ahead and veto legislation. Presidents can go ahead and they can veto bills that are passed by Congress. Now here's the thing though, and you're going to want to write this down because this is important. And when I say it's important, I mean it's got a good chance of being on the exam. Presidents were not supposed to veto laws just because they disagreed with the policy. If I'm the president of the United States and Congress passes Phil's corn law and I don't like it, I'm not supposed to veto it like, oh, I hate this law, boom, and veto it. That's not the way it was supposed to work. The veto power was given to the president to prevent Congress from doing two things. From passing what I'm going to call bad legislation. What do I mean by bad legislation? One, or on the lecture notes, one is that if a law was written poorly, if it was just done in a way that it was poorly written, poorly drawn up, not good, the president was supposed to veto it. But second and more importantly, the president was supposed to veto a law if it was unconstitutional. Which gets back to the oath. What did the president swear to do? To preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. So what the president was supposed to do is if Congress passed a law that the president thought was unconstitutional, the president was supposed to go ahead and veto that law. Now, keeping that in mind, it's important that Congress, the framers, did not give the president an absolute veto. If you're not sure what an absolute veto is, let me explain. The king of England had an absolute veto. That meant that if Congress passed a law and then the king said, I don't like this law, it was done. There was nothing that Parliament could do. If Parliament passed a law and the king vetoed it, it was a done deal. He vetoed it, it was over, end of story. The president doesn't have an absolute veto. The president can veto something, but Congress has the ability to override the veto. In other words, the president can veto it, sure, but Congress can go ahead and say, we like it. And as long as they can get 2/3 of a vote in both the House of Representatives and in the Senate, they can override the president's veto and it becomes a law. And that's why we say it's not absolute. The president can veto it, but that doesn't kill it. That just means that if Congress wants to make it a law, it's going to require a little bit more support. And then the last thing is, and we'll be talking about this more later, the president also does not have what's called a line item veto. a line item veto. And I'll explain that at the beginning of the next video.